Welcome to the Building Texas Show, where we find the leaders behind the businesses and organizations driving progress in Texas. In each episode, we share the stories of innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders committed to evolving Texas into its next era. I'm your host, Justin McKenzie, your guide to help you think about how to engage in the movement and support building Texas across the entire state. Founded by German freethinkers determined to find freedom from dictatorial monarchies and clerics, Comfort, Texas remains an unincorporated census-designated area today. To that end, Comfort residents and businesses historically relied on community support and a spirit of the possible to be successful. To this day, Comfort is a place where people gather, they celebrate, and tap into the essence of the earliest settlers of the Texas Hill Country. Comfort is known in the region for its annual Christmas in Comfort celebration and is an ideal spot for tourists and weekend travelers wanting to experience the magic of the Texas Hill Country without the crowds. Welcome to this week's episode of the Building Texas Show. I am thrilled to be coming back into the studio to talk about Comfort, Texas, and we've had the opportunity to feature Comfort, Texas on the Building Texas Show across about 10 episodes now. And what you will see if you go in and look at that content is the spirit of the people. The spirit of Comfort, Texas, and the free thinkers that founded it is still very much alive. Today we're visiting with Chris Havens, who has a tremendous background across the country and in Texas in particular. But today their focus is really about comfort and bring it back into the studio to talk about why we're doing the feature and the beauty of Comfort as a census-designated area, still remaining the freethinker bastion in Texas. So Chris Havens, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
How did you find Comfort, Texas?
That's kind of a long story, but the short story is I came across Comfort after I came to Texas for corporate reasons, just exploring the Hill Country and kind of thinking about where I wanted to be in the next chapter, which I had no idea when would be. And I had a wonderful tour guide for that adventure, a guy by the name of John McCullum, who is a very well-known farm and ranch broker out of Kerrville, World War II veteran, just a wonderful man. And we hit it off. And he took me all over the place, showing me different kinds of things. And he asked me, what do you want? What kind of place would you like? And I said, I want water. I want a view. I want pastures. I want to raise some cattle. And he said, you're not going to find that.
Yeah.
Not in your budget.
Yeah.
Anyway, and it turned out that I stumbled on the particular ranch that I bought through local connections in San Antonio, and then purchased the ranch, and the rest is sort of history, I guess.
Well, today we've met and we have started working together through the Comfort Area Foundation. Mm-hmm. And that's an older organization, 20 plus years at this point, but it's evolving and people still ask, what is the Comfort Area Foundation? And I think you and I, as serving board members today, should talk about that and really highlight the investment that the Area Foundation, investment's the wrong word, but the money that we're putting into talking about comfort and drawing out that digital conversation. So let's start with, what is the Comfort Area Foundation?
Well, I think, you opened the door pretty aptly with the term investment, and then you corrected yourself.
Yeah, well,
because investment implies economics.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, the real investment that drives the Comfort Area Foundation is human effort and intellectual creativity and esprit de corps, and in the real sort of in the real spirit of the old free thinkers. It was, how do you improve your surrounds and your environment and the people you interact with without a government?
Well, and that is a
Essentially.
great disclaimer because the census designated area, there is no government. The representation that I think Comfort residents enjoy is one county commissioner,
Correct. Part of a county commission.
part of a county commissioner. And so to that end, you're talking about the time and talent. I say time, talent, and treasure a lot, but the time and talent investment into what local government would typically be doing. I'm not going to say we're doing government work, but we're having conversations that bring people together.
Well, I mean, the thing that ends up, would be, quote, would be missing in modern times from the way these people would have governed themselves before they came to this country, would be the town square, the place where people came together and shared their ideas, talked about their fears, and came up with ideas, came up with thoughts. How do we grow? How do we protect ourselves? How do we provide for water, education, those kinds of things? Without leaning on authorities to do it, but rather being self-sustaining in that regard. You basically take charge of your own destiny, if you will.
Yeah. And they're very proud of that. To this day, there's a lot of pride in the Comfort community, however you want to define that, around being independent, around the freethinker mentality. We talk about the monument that is there. I think that's a great example of Comfort collectively thinking differently. But then we've talked about, when we were looking at the historic side of Comfort, Comfort has long time been a dairy farm for a lot of reasons.
Dairy farms, yeah.
We got into agricultural, wool, and these are family legacies that are still continuing today in a couple of ranches. But now you see the growth out of San Antonio coming that direction. And I have said Comfort is really what I would say is the last untouched, undeveloped state highway town. And it's still sitting out there, but it's finding itself and reinventing itself every generation to try and say, how do we sustain?
Yeah, I mean, Comfort's an interesting, you touched a little bit on, Comfort's an interesting collection of people. And for the most part, the respect for the legacy and the history is fairly entrenched, if you will, in both the people who, you can still find people in Comfort, many who are connected to old German families, and some of the children who are now older people, of course, but who spoke German only until they were in regular school, 6 or 7 years old, and agricultural primarily their upbringing. So they're rooted in the training that came from an old world culture. At the same time, many of them are incredibly successful people who've come into who've grown into the modern era, if you will, both culturally and economically, but haven't forgotten where they came from and what it is that and who it is that provided for their past. So that to some large extent that influences Comfort's direction and on the ground culture, if you will. Then of course you have new people, and those new people come there because of the hospitality to some large extent, the friendship, the friendliness, the openness of the people, which seems to be a little counterintuitive what I just said, but the reality is, Comfort is on the surface an old world place in a way, and yet it's incredibly welcoming. And if you want to be a part of the community, not apart from the community, it's a pretty easy place to assimilate.
You can get plugged in, and they're always looking for that time and talent aspect as well.
Correct.
But then I look at the people that have moved to Comfort, and let's just say in the last 25 years, since 2000, it is people that value that freethinker culture. They value the quality of life and the spirit of the people. And through all the episodes where we feature Comfort, it really does come out that it's the people that make it so tremendous. And it's the community support. We talked to Craig Leader at the Ingenhut on High. And he talked about buying a dilapidated, burned down piece of history. And looking at the pictures and remembering from my experience, it was ugly for a long time on your premier retail shopping street.
Right.
It was a burned down construction zone.
Right.
But we had somebody like Craig and his family, Janine, and everybody investing in that. And then the Comfort Heritage Foundation stepped in and said, hey, we really like what you're doing. Tell us more. And Craig tells the story really well in his episode, but that was the spirit that I found when I came into Comfort through the electric co-op and on the area foundation board. But I saw so many people that had brilliant careers all over the world. They come here for the quality of life. They've come here for that independence. But then they've doubled down, and you forget those people have a background. And now you're left with some very smart, connected people investing in this community. And that's where I see like Singing Water Winery, Bending Branch Winery, becoming the magnets that are bringing tourists out there. And then the people are discovering High's Cafe and the Freethinkers General Store and all of the retail opportunities. So it's a balance of all of these people coming together. But the leadership of the Area Foundation seems to be an important part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that you highlighted, you mentioned something. I mean, you talk about the Ingenhut store as which is Craig's project, as a sort of a dilapidated bit of an eyesore. But for people like myself, who you asked me what attracted me to Comfort, I mean, I grew up in New England in a big dairy farming area, and not far from where I grew up, there was an old store that was along the side of the road that was an implement, repair shop, an implement sales space, a grocery store, a gas station, 2 pumps along the side of the street. When I was a little kid, you could still go there, and there was one pump that had a glass globe on it, and you could watch the gas drop. And old Mr. Rowell ran the store, and every little kid that came there got a piece of candy. And it was a community place for a small little town, or a community. It wasn't a town really. There were little towns, but they were all very small. And that's what the Ingenhut store was when I used to come here traveling through the hill country. It was run by Gregory Crowder, and it was you could buy everything from fishing lures to shotgun shells to milk in the cooler to ice cream bars and all kinds of hardware. I mean, it was a little bit of everything. Yep. And some would say much of it outdated, but it was still there, and so it's kind of that old feeling, that welcoming feeling that you got from all of not just the people, but also the trappings that the people preserved and saved and used.
The nostalgia.
Yeah, well, yeah, but it was still relevant. I mean, Gregory's store was a pretty cool place, for a kid from anywhere in the country that had, ever experienced that. And for people who hadn't, it was an amazing experience, right? Because it was a throwback.
Until recently, we had the Bergheim General Store. So recent being about a decade.
Right.
But it was still very much that. It's where you would go to get your buck knife that your granddad carried forever. So I appreciate that people restore that building and bring it back to life, but it's hard to recapture that sentiment, that general store.
It is.
But we see retailers. I mean, Kara Hines and Lisa Jenkins, they were featured, and they talk about, well, who's coming to Comfort now and what is attracting them. And Kara has the bend towards the artistic and eclectic, coming in to find, we have brilliant authors, we have brilliant artists, creators that have retired out here, and they're still creating, but you might find them pop up a gallery very quickly and feature their neon lights, right? That was such a big win in this pop-up initiative when Kara did that with the neon lights, that I was going down High Street and I'm like, what is this new glow? Why is this here?
The neon signs.
Yeah. And so it is transitioning from that, it was a general store, fish and lures and everything you need, to now it's it's a tourist magnet. It is a way to bring retail and commerce in to discover comfort in a way, but it looks a lot different even in the last 10 years than it would have.
Yeah, one of the things that always made comfort, to me anyway, fairly unique, particularly as I traveled through there and even in living there for most of the last 20 years, 25 years, I guess, was, when you were in a store in Comfort, the owner was there. So they were owner-run stores, an eclectic selection of merchandise, sometimes things that the owners were, interested in themselves and collected and sold, and some of it was things that just was their forte, whether it was clothing or whatever, but the owners were there. And so a stroll through Comfort, if you were a gregarious, outgoing person like myself, could take all day.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because everybody had a story, everybody did and still does have a story about how they got there, why they're there, what attracted them. And you might hear nuances of the story as you go up and down High Street, but they're pretty much all the same in the sense of what it is that brings people there or has, and what's kept them there. And in my time there, we've had, I would say, maybe at least 3 generations of people who came there looking for the things that you described, and then eventually, they outlived their enjoyment years, which sounds terrible. But at the end of the day, we all age, we all get older, and we have to do different things. And so people buy and sell, and a new generation comes in, and in many cases, they're the same kind of people looking for the same experience.
They are those independent, entrepreneurial, free thinkers that want to build what they want to build. And,
right.
And we have a place where that can still happen. And that's tremendous to talk about. And
that's attractive from a tourist point of view, if that's your goal, because you're talking about we're all, I say, characters to some large extent, and we're part of the product of the place.
Well, I mean, you go out there on any early morning, and you see people walking their blocks. And those are some interesting people.
Absolutely.
The examples you gave of people born in Comfort, still with us today, that their first language was German. And that spills over into their professional life when they were negotiating with Germans in a very big international stage.
Exactly.
But that heritage helped them internationally in that conversation. But it's the marketing. It is. So that attracts. But for a lot of people, they've never heard of Comfort, Texas. They don't know the free thinkers. I mean, you may have gone there and you stumbled off the highway into Comfort and you found the pizza place. Pizza place on High is great. But you look around there and you wouldn't see much more. And I talk a lot about in our interviews, you've got to get off 27 to find High Street first off. And if you're lucky enough to stumble into that, you'll find some of these characters in their shops or walking up and down supporting other shops. But it's been word of mouth. It's been accidental. It's been a lot of people trying to get the message of Comfort out. But where does that land? And when you think about your career in marketing and going back to marketing across Texas, marketing across the U.S., it's all very different.
Well, it certainly is different today. I mean, when I opened my resort in Comfort, that was before social media. That was before you could sign up for 12 different registration facilities. Yeah. And even then it was a leap ahead of what it had been 10 years earlier, in the sense that, at least you could do a website.
Yeah.
And so you had a website and you had your own you had to have your own reservation system. But the interesting thing about that was that I enjoyed, and that I still today think is people we need to be careful with, is when people made a reservation with my facility or my people, it was me. It was like it was my face, my culture, my interpretation of hospitality that they were dealing with. There wasn't a third party in between, like Airbnb or VRBO or one of those, and nothing wrong with them. It's just that takes the personality out of the initial interaction, and it makes it a little more difficult to actually be that hospitable face, if you will, even before the actual face-to-face interaction starts. And so, people have to work a little harder at that in order to make that work. But it's, and so, you have to, the question really is, what's your identity, right? Like, I've had this debate with people about that very specific subject just because I've spent the last 15 years or so of my life playing around in that realm. You got to own your brand. I mean, your brand is who you are, no matter what you may think. At the end of the day, and it's the only thing you own. It's your brand and your reputation. So, to the extent that you can, now the problem is, or the challenge is, like for a little place like Comfort, the challenge is in a world filled with people trying to, establish that brand and self-promote. How do you lift yourself above the noise?
Yeah.
And now with content like blogs and all sorts of other content flooding the zone, if you will, or being out there, when someone decides to look up Comfort, if there's enough content there that's interesting and quality, that in and of itself becomes a part of the brand.
Well, that's my hope. My hope is that we've featured enough of the community that you can start to see the texture. You can start to see the theme of the people being such an important part of what your Comfort experience is going to be. And I think that's lacking. I can think of examples where I've used Airbnb to pick on them, and I can go in and out of a community and never be seen by a person that lives there.
Correct.
And that's my loss because I miss what they have to offer, and I make my itinerary based on what I found and think is the right things to do. But what if I had met that Airbnb owner and they could have said, hey, there's this hidden secret that you don't know anything about? Or they can just have you a great experience where check-in is so much more than here's the code for the door and good luck.
And the reality of it is not all tourists are the same.
Right.
So Airbnb and VRBO have been a wonderful vehicle for those people that want to be in that business and can't truly to find the reach that you can get to with those people from those services. I mean, I've used them for a number of years, and the reach that you achieve as a small operator, it would be currently today, especially, would be very difficult to achieve financially on your own.
Yeah.
So they play a vital role in the industry. But in a little town like Comfort, one of the values of the things people have been thinking about now as a community is if you get together and put the voice out there, the voice becomes the people, and it's coming at people from all sorts of different directions. Fly fishing guys or whatever, or farmers or wine people or people who are interested in agricultural communities or historic buildings or whatever. All of that becomes a collage of voices speaking about the town.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool when you consider it, because for the most part, that's a hard nut to crack or hard to achieve.
Well, where would you achieve that? And I say it that way because what you just described for the resort and rental space community, Airbnb has been a great lift. But I think of our retailers on High Street or our service companies, the nursery that we talked to, RA Nursery. They're having to spend a lot more money today on digital marketing and their reach. And that's a hard thing to break into, one. And if you don't know how to do it, and if you've never done it yourself, you're paying professionals, technicians to come in and help you with that, but they don't always capture the voice because they are helping in San Antonio and Austin and other places. They're moving quick, and you're paying for this story. What I hope with our work and through the Area Foundation's investment is that we're going in more local and really helping all of these businesses, because they typically are businesses, or individuals tell their heritage story, or the businesses are telling the collective comfort story. And that when we put all of that together, the voice is louder when there's that many people saying a similar message.
It's louder, and if you're a viewer, if you're a consumer of digital media or social media or whatever vehicle you're using, it's also more authentic, because the more times you hear it, the more you believe it's in different voices. It's not the same Super Bowl commercial, 10 times in an hour is what you need to get reach. It's really a whole bunch of disparate voices talking about their own experience. And that's a powerful message. I think it's going to it likely is not going to get easier as AI begins to sort of invade the space. But the advantage of the kind of stuff we're doing or talking about or considering doing long term is these are authentic, real voices. These are real people that, like nobody's going to make a digital image of me and try to use it. If they do, I don't know what they're going to get from it. But anyway, but I'm just saying, at the end of the day, it's powerful. I think it's a powerful way to advertise yourself and your community.
Well, and so much of the community is based on the historical legacy. And I so appreciate we touched on the Ingenhood story, but I didn't get to the Heritage Foundation's role in that. And the Heritage Foundation is such an incredible group of people that are telling that long-term story. They're collecting all of these family stories. We talk about ranch lands and how long will that ranch land remain that beautiful ranch? And that's a private property conversation for sure. But there is this energy around how do we hold the heritage. And when we can tell those stories, one of the things that I talk a lot about on the show is the high school kids. The impact of opportunity coming out of Comfort High School and seeing the people like you and others that have been successful in your careers outside of Comfort, and then you're bringing opportunities in. You're an incredible mentor for kids in that stage and age and how they come into the world, where they see it. We talked to Alfredo from RA Nurseries, and Alfredo Avalos has a great story where a high school guidance counselor really trajectorily changed where he was going in life, sending him to Columbia.
Changed his expectations of what was possible.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And he celebrated that because it was people from the community leaning into him and saying, here's the opportunity. And I know we do that through CTE programs today, but it's a call to the business owners and the people in there that we're telling the story for the next generation to fully understand and appreciate where it's come from, because the generations behind us, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, they had to go through this evolution too. It just looked a little bit different. I mean, it's continuously, and you said it well, like every couple of generations we're seeing this move.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that's the human story of evolution, right? Yeah. Every 50 years or 40 years, and in terms of active work life, it's historically been shorter, primarily because, of Comfort. Comfort's been a place where people come after a career, if they're a owner of a business downtown or they're an investor. Now, there's plenty of people that are in generational businesses. That's a little bit different evolution, but the real challenge for a community like Comfort, if it's to retain its heritage, I think, is to find a way to ensure that the kids, the young people who graduate from the high school, understand what opportunities exist for them that might not show on the surface, and that the world's their oyster, pretty much. I mean, especially if they get after it, you got to work at it for sure. But and there's wonderful examples of young people from Comfort who have made wonderful lives for themselves, and they may not be living in Comfort, but they many of them come back later. Yeah. So, and you want to, you don't necessarily. It's interesting to figure out who they are so they can tell the story while it's still very relevant, right? Alfredo is a wonderful example of that. Darren Peterman that runs High's Cafe. And I mean, there's a number of young people the lumberyard, Ledlow's. So, I mean, there's a lot of people around. Chris Holman runs a welding shop. There's a lot of young people. Jason Lintner's son, who's in the agricultural business, along with the generational Lintner family. Those people. They're great stories. They're people who have love where they grew up. Mm-hmm. Their expectations were pretty much open, and they've made great lives for themselves. Some of them started out with more than others, but at the end of the day, if you go at it, in this country, you can make it work.
Yeah, and if you're an ambitious high schooler, you could meet some really interesting people in Comfort that could give tremendous wisdom on global careers, smaller careers, local careers there.
Yeah,
whatever you want to do, there's mentors
County.
That are out here. Yeah, Kendall County is a wealth of experience and wisdom, but it's knowing where to go, knowing how to ask, and us being available for it.
Right.
Kendall County is an interesting topic because we touched on it briefly around representation, and Comfort is a census-designated area. I say that a lot.
Yeah.
Because I think there's more of those than people realize. If you get out into unincorporated county lands and there's all of a sudden a gas station and 150 souls is how it's defined, you can become a census-designated area. And it comes with some benefits, but it does not come with the municipal benefits, right? So a lot of people that maybe move to Comfort say, oh, well, where's the city hall? Well, there isn't one. It truly is people working together. Where have you seen that? And I ask in your career, because you've worked in a lot of these counties, you've worked with leaders across your career, but in most recent, I mean, it's hard to open a resort, a hotel, a commercial kitchen. Those things do have rules that you have to abide by.
Sure.
And it gets that much more difficult when you're in a historic building or you're in a historic area and you're far removed from county engineering, or you're bringing a new business idea in. I think Singing Water is a good example of they're really pushing their business growth and bringing some of the legislatures, the people that make the rules, the rule makers, along with them. And I appreciate that's very much a Comfort spirit. But how do we find that balance?
Well, the interesting thing is you started with the idea of designated area, census designated area. I don't know the genesis of that other than they have to have a way to delineate people in a space, because that's a government thing too, right? But at the end of the day, the history of, minimal municipal structure or government is a function of size.
Yep.
So, one set layers on the other. But if you go back east, which we think of as the big civilized part of the world, if you will, almost probably 85% of all the little communities, little small rural communities up to, the size of Comfort, 2,000, 2,500 people are, very limited municipal government. It might be one mayor and a secretary.
Yep.
And a couple of councilmen, if that. They don't have 12 yards of zoning rules and that sort of thing, simply because they can't keep them. They can't support it, can't keep them up. But they all have volunteer fire departments and rescue squads. And I think I saw something recently in a presentation that the Comfort area, or the Comfort Volunteer Fire Department, put on. Something like 70% of all of the landmass in the United States is covered from a fire protection point of view by volunteer fire departments. That's incredible. So the whole concept of small community volunteerism still exists, and it's as time goes on, it'll get harder and harder, probably just because of the sort of litigious nature of what happens when something bad happens, right? Then all of a sudden,
the lawyers come in.
Well, or whatever.
Give them a hard time, but I'm so glad that you mentioned volunteer fire, because I think that is an opportunity where the modern world that we know and have been raised in recently is meeting rural in a big way, and I'm seeing that line really distinguish around professional fire departments or volunteer fire departments. And I've been around volunteer fire for a long time. That can be a traumatic reality. And you see a lot of volunteer fire. It's good introduction for high school kids into that service. They need people excited to go do that kind of work. So you see a lot of young people coming into volunteer fire. Comfort has someone that's served for 51 years within Comfort Volunteer Fire Department. And I want to thank him first for doing that much service. Rural accidents, rural firefighting is a traumatic experience. And when it's a volunteer setting, there's not a lot of support structures around it. So these high school kids, it's not far removed that they've rolled up on some very tough situations and work with it. And I mention it only because those are people showing service. They're getting involved in their community. They are putting themselves, if they're young people, putting themselves on a path. A lot of your volunteer firemen are professional firemen in the city, and then they serve when they're out at home on their time off. What an incredible service mentality to have. And I think it is apt. 70% of, I know 56% of the country is covered by rural co-op. So it's not surprising to hear that 70% is volunteer.
I think
fire.
that's the number they used. And I mean, to your point, I mean, like, you know, it's not all that different from a traumatic war experience to show up. I mean, you know, we've all, you know, certainly in this part of the world, you read of the freeway accidents and the horrific nature of what happens, and whole families disappear, you know, and I can't imagine the emotional feeling of showing up as the first responder to one of those situations and realizing that in some cases the next 10 minutes of your effort is the difference between life and death for whoever you find. I mean, that's a heavy weight for a 16, 17-year-old kid.
Tremendous.
Or a 25 or 30-year-old man.
Or somebody's been doing it for 51 years.
That's right.
It's an incredible responsibility that as we move into these rural areas, I think it's often overlooked.
Very much so, yeah.
And when we're developing communities and building around it, my call is, let's talk about fire. Let's talk about how that's supporting. We see emergency service districts going up for vote. That might not be the right vehicle to do it, but I will tell you, you need to do something for fire safety. We're building some really large houses in the hill country that just can't be supported by volunteer fire. A 3-story house, they don't have that ladder truck that you're used to from River Oaks or wherever you came from.
Well, I think I mean, I don't know for sure now, but I know when I built my ranch, originally when I built the resort, I created a fire plan. And Danny, the gentleman you're talking about who was there for 51 years, we walked the ranch together, and he gave me all kinds of advice. And we did a little map and put it for his people, so they knew where all the fire connections were on the water tanks and where the swimming pool was, and how to get in the gate. And I mean, that's, you know, it's been 15 years now since I owned the ranch, but I mean, they were a wealth of knowledge. And you know, it was, I'd come from a corporate background, so the idea of risk management seemed to be something I ought to give some consideration to. And he was, I mean, it was great for him. The fire department was incredibly supportive. And I was amazed. Just, you know, if I'd have hired some consultant out of somewhere, who knows? But I mean, those guys were there. They were the ones that are going to respond to anything, right? If it's an emergency of any kind. Anyhow,
they're a resource.
Incredible resource.
If you're moving into a community, if you're coming out there, understand what it is. If you're a tourist, understand that it's going to take a little bit longer.
Right, sure.
I go back to every county's different in Texas, and we're all struggling with this growth conversation. How do you balance heritage with the need for future opportunity? Again, the kids graduating from Comfort High School, where do they see that opportunity locally to stay close to home, have a great career and grow, or to leave, do whatever they do, and then with the hope of attracting them back? Where do you see those county governments doing things really well? What is a conversation you're celebrating?
Well, I try to stay out of the weeds on that kind of thing. But I mean, I think the most difficult thing at that sort of, at the community, even whether it's a city, municipal government or at a county, is to try to balance, if you will, the various constituencies that you're serving, and be able to sort out the noise from the special interest folks and the people who have an altruistic goal of just doing the right thing, if you will. And that's hard to sort out. I mean, that's why I've never done politics. I just wouldn't, it's a hard place to be. I mean, and we're a fairly divided entity or world, and probably always have been, interestingly enough, when you start looking at the margin of victory in presidential elections over the last 80 years, we're pretty divided. We're not simpatico in everything we believe. So that balance is critically important. And being able to, make sure that, like the unintended consequences are at least understood and managed such that, one error or one poor judgment doesn't compound another. And I see that probably a fair bit in the decisions. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what, for the constituents, it's hard to figure out where a certain decision came from. Like what's the...
Yeah. But that goes back to the media aspect of how we tell the story. Why was that decision made this way or that way? Sure. Because it is, you mentioned presidential numbers, and I look at local numbers, and this is a bend we talk about, and 7% turnout on local elections, which is county commissioners and city people, for the county seat. We had 7% turnout. But then our county is setting records on the presidential turnout. And my personal conversation here is just encouraging people, when you move into these communities, when you become part of it, get involved, if at a minimum, voting in local elections so that you are represented and your voice is heard. Mm-hmm. Because you're going to learn a lot just going and understanding what does a county commissioner do, because it's a big job in Texas. It's a powerful and impactful job in rural county land.
The hardest thing for me, this is just sort of, it was for me, it wasn't hard, it was just to be respectful of moving into I grew up in a place not dissimilar to Comfort. That's part of what attracted me to Comfort, a dairy farming community but also a river. We had a river, we had agriculture, we had a feed mill down the road. I mean, I tell people, if people laugh, I grew up in a little town outside of a small city. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in a town outside the town. I was 34 people. The town was called Galilee. My name is Christopher, and my father was Joseph, and he was a carpenter and a farmer.
It comes full circle there.
I'm just a joke. I'm just being silly. But to me, the idea is, there's an old adage that says, don't say anything till you've walked in their shoes, till you've, and in my case, I mean, I spent pretty much my initial time in Comfort sort of doing my thing and, managing my property and integrating into the community as a helper, if you will, or on different entities and active in the library and the board and my church and those kind of things, but not as a Fortune 100 CEO kind of leader. Because I didn't know enough about the community to have meaningful input, I didn't think.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't import, what you learn everywhere else in the world just informs your database.
Yeah.
It isn't, until you understand how other people's databases are informed, it's hard to be a meaningful voice and help if that's your goal. If you want to be in charge, that's a different thing. But if you're just trying to be helpful and supportive, especially when it comes to young people and try to help mentor their directions, you can't really do that till you understand who they are.
Yeah.
And so that takes a little time. So the only caution I would give to people moving into small places is don't move in to take over.
Yeah.
Move in to learn and then help the community advance in every way you can.
It's incredible that you mentioned that, and you talk about your leadership background, and you could have stepped in a very big, noisy way. It's not your personality, but it really hasn't been the personality of any of the folks that I've seen come into Comfort. They've all been, and there's some people, again, with tremendous background and capital. They could come in and bully it, but they don't. They come in and they're extremely respectful to the land, to the people, and to the idea of Comfort. And that's what I've just so enjoyed getting to know and realizing that that's still a reality. It isn't all progress. It isn't all how do we squeeze more people in here.
Right.
It is I'm using my personal treasure to build out this beautiful heritage ranch in your instance, or a winery, and 2 other instances I can think of where they took their success and have turned it into an opportunity for the kids in Comfort.
Or I'm just, or like many other people around, I'm just sort of saving something until the right use comes along.
Yeah.
Right. I'm just making sure it doesn't fall down, or
I'm a steward.
I'm a steward. Exactly. That's what I think you said something after you visited my ranch, and I said, like, God made the ranch, I just stewarded it for a while.
Exactly.
That's all. And that's a wonderful journey if you can do it.
Well, and it's a wise approach. I think that tempered, sit in, understand the landscape, get involved for the reason of being involved, making an impact, and you'll plug right into a community like Comfort, or I think communities around the state. They need more people like you coming in and just giving their wisdom. And that is true in every small town. Those people are there. And it's how are they plugged in? How do we really give that a voice and ensure that we are thinking about the future, but balancing that heritage?
Well, for me, what I would say about that, just in general, is sort of my if you want to call it wisdom, if you will, is informed by many, many things.
Yep.
Many things. Not the least of which is mentors. The individual people who have touched my lives over a very long period of time. In many, many cases, very one-to-one, very intimate, and I mean, I'm still in touch with people I've worked for 35 years ago, worked with, and young people who work for my company in my part of the business, young people who helped at the ranch, and the people I met and interacted with and learned from when I came here.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, our wisdom is sort of a sum total of our experiences. And in my case, I would say with a fair bit of reverence, I feel like I've gained probably gained more from my experiences in Comfort with the people that I've interacted with than I brought to the table, for sure. No doubt about it.
Well, as we wrap up our conversation, I want to thank you, Chris, for serving on the Area Foundation, and for all the board members of the Area Foundation. I so appreciate the commitment and the spirit of what we're trying to do there. But then to your point, it is a collection of experiences that create our data set and our decision making. And I want to encourage anybody to go get involved in their local community in a new way, not for what is it going to do for you, but really, what can you learn from? Where can you plug in? Where can you add value? And in all of these towns, you're going to find some incredible people that you probably don't already know if you're not already involved in that part of the community.
Right. I mean, there's a fairly famous quote from a former president who, he basically just said, ask not what your community can do for you, but what you can do for your community. He used country, but that's a little bigger atmosphere. But
yeah,
I'm realistic about my reach.
But that's the spirit of Comfort, and it's a lot of people coming together saying, "What can we do for our community?" And in all of our features, you see that, and that spirit is just so loud from every one of them, independent of we didn't talk about it, we didn't set the stage on what to talk about. That is just what makes it happen. And thank you to the Area Foundation for giving us the opportunity to come in and tell those stories and then promote it and I want to ask our listeners to go out and find Comfort Texas and see what you love about it. But then look around your area of the state or country. What is that nostalgic general store that you remember? What is it today? Have you gone back to it? And how are you exposing your kids to that heritage aspect and saying that's an important part of what their future is going to be too?
What are the things that inform your life? What are the things that you value and that have stuck with you all the years? And I would tell you that, I would tell you that in most cases, when you cut to the chase, it's going to be the people, right? Stories like, and there's so many of them in every place in the country, but there's so many of them in little towns where the voices are still around to remember them, and where transitions of people don't change every week, so people remember the teacher that they had 45 years ago. I mean, I can take you back to my grade school and tell you the most influential teacher, gray nuns, Jesuit priests. I remember those people because they impacted who I am significantly.
Yeah.
In a short period of time.
And in ways you didn't realize in that moment.
Correct.
But going back
Absolutely.
And reevaluating that, similar to Alfredo, it was a great opportunity to say, wow, what Ann Harris did for him is incredible. And I know that she probably did that for many others.
Right.
Because
I'm
that's
sure,
the spirit.
Because that's who she is.
And
I don't know.
And so it's just a call. It's why we're doing it. And I'd encourage other creators to say, how can you highlight the small town that you're a part of and the people that are making it really magical today?
Right. Well, my sort of hope is that in the little town of Comfort, and maybe in other places, you're doing these kinds of things, that once people get comfortable with what the format is, and it can be a shorter format for sure for some people, but there's an amazing plethora of stories, incredible stories in a place where people, where there is a generation, especially, of people who are passing from our world, who have an amazing span of knowledge. If you think about Comfort in the last 85 years or 90 years, it's like day and night before electricity, back when we had mills, a lot has happened in 80 years.
Which is a very small amount of time. 50 years from now, I'm going to be thrilled that people in Comfort then can go back and see Gary and Barb Lindner tell their story.
Yeah, that's right.
And what a gift to those people 50 years from now that it's captured.
That's right. Absolutely. And not just for the people of Comfort, but for the people of the country to understand the impact that every little small life can have, regardless of where it comes from. Because the people you mentioned, lots of them, the people you're talking to, have had a pretty big stamp outside of Comfort.
Yep.
And most people don't even have a clue that they're there.
Yep.
Right? I mean, and there's a lot of them.
Yeah, so many of them. And to your point, in every town, I think that's the instance.
Right.
And you can go find those servants that are coming back and stewarding that community into the future. Well, Chris Havens, thank you for spending time with us today. And thank you for the way that you're building Texas.
Thank you.